Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan from Fireside Knicks with my friends and co-host Dylan and Justin Backer, and we have something to talk about that's not like super important in terms of like trade rumors, all that stuff, but kind of pressing in the sense that Evan Fournier came out with some pretty interesting comments talking about his time with the Knicks and kind of the situation that happened last year when he got pulled for rotation. Obviously, that was kind of the catalyst for the Knicks, getting their season going. And we're not sitting here and saying like Evan Fournier is like a terrible person or whatever it may be, but the Knicks were a significantly better team with him off the court. Whether it was because of the defensive issues, whether they felt, whether the Knicks just really needed they just needed a younger player out there. They played significantly better without Evan Fournier. The numbers backed it up. The eye test backs that up. He was not a great defensive player. This team really struggled defensively. And, kind of thinking of it from the perspective of what we know now, the Knicks had RJ Barrett and Evan Fournier out there on the court together with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. It's not hard to imagine how teams were able to score so much early in the year against this team and how it felt like teams could shoot like prime Steph Curry against the Knicks. You have, there's a plethora of games that happened last year that you're like, how is this guy shooting like this from three? The Knicks needed better perimeter defense. He was really struggling. Kind of getting to the comments here because I know I'm rambling a little bit. He said, you want to spit on everyone. You have hatred. Derrick Rose and I looked at each other and said to each other, what the hell are we doing here? He also made comments saying in the second big quote here where he was discussing not being in the rotation. That Tom Thibodeau made comments that he was initially just going to be pulled from the starting five, and then at some point in their first road game, it was like, actually, you're out of the rotation in total. Fournier made some spot starts and some spot appearances when the Knicks needed him for injury situations, but overall, that kind of spelled the end of Evan Fournier's time in New York. Justin, kind of get us take it away here with the situation of Evan Fournier, because I know that this is kind of a weird situation. I know that the emotions on this is rough. You feel for him as a player, but you also understand why the team made the decision. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on this and where you stand on this issue.
Yeah, Evan's first season with the Knicks last season was actually a pretty successful season, in standard of what we paid him to do. He was paid to come here and shoot the basketball, and that's exactly what he did. He was the fourth best shooter in the NBA last year. He broke the franchise record for made threes. It was a rather successful season for an individual standpoint. Obviously, the team wasn't very good his first season here or whatnot. But from an individual standpoint, pretty successful season. He looked like he had earned his stripes a little bit. The second season, this past season, obviously was a disaster, and it was a disaster off rip. You could tell right away who the black hole on our team was, and it was clearly Fournier. He wasn't playing well at all. He wasn't shooting the ball well. Obviously, he provides nothing on defense. So, when you combine that with that, it's pretty fair to point the finger at him and be like, that guy needs to be benched. So that's exactly what happened. Tibbs finally made that decision. Everyone had been calling for him to get benched for quite a while, and then he finally benched him around December, I believe. And I actually have some stats here from the game that Fournier first was out of the rotation, which I believe was like December 4th, all the way through the end of the regular season. The Knicks were on a 51-win pace. They were 37-22. They were third in offensive rating, fifth in net rating. So, obviously it's upsetting for any player to get benched. No competitor wants to sit on the bench and watch everyone else compete. But the matter of fact is that the Knicks were a much better team with him on the bench, and the results show for it. I don't think it's any coincidence that they started to win immediately after he got benched. I don't think that's a coincidence, So obviously he's upset, but there's legitimate basketball reasons why he was benched. I don't think it's anything personal. And as far as these comments go, I think he's kind of just frustrated that he's still not been traded, and we're about halfway through the off season now, and he still hasn't been traded. So I could understand why he's a little upset. No player likes to get benched. I don't think he's handled it like a pro most of the time. I think this is kind of just him kind of like, all right, this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm kind of frustrated now. Please trade me. I want to play type thing. You know what I mean? So, I don't think it's anything like too significant. Players get upset when this happens all the time. Feelings are going to get hurt. It's a sad reality of the business. Feelings do get hurt in this business, and Fournier's feelings have been hurt. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think the Knicks were a better team without him on the court. It's the fact of the matter, or the matter of fact, excuse me. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand on it. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. The Knicks were so much better when Fournier was off the rotation. So there's a reason why he wasn't playing. He had a couple spot starts here and there, but it was really only if somebody was injured or if they just needed to fill in another person, whatever. He didn't play any significant roles in those spot starts, those spot appearances off the bench or anything like that. He was kind of just there to be an extra body, and like you said, his first season as a Knick was, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Obviously, defensively, it was awful, but offensively, he did what he was paid to do, which was, like you said, shoot the ball and score, and he did just that. Yes, maybe it wasn't to the standard we had hoped, but he did do it. He did score to a degree that was, serviceable enough. Yes, the team wasn't very good, and you can point the finger at the lack of defense that he was providing that was causing a lot of defensive lapse that season, and why we were one of the worst three point defensive teams that season. But looking forward, I mean, with these comments, I mean, I agree with what you said. It feels more just like that pent up frustration of all right, I want to get traded because I want to actually play. I want to have an opportunity. I don't want to just keep sitting on the bench and doing nothing. Yes, he's still, racking up money, but, he's an athlete. He wants to play. He's not just going to want to sit there and do nothing. He wants to play. That's what his job is to do, is to play basketball and, just do his thing. And he hasn't been able to do that because he was benched. And, yes, he was benched for a good reason. Quentin Grimes was clearly a much better fit in that starting five. He had much better chemistry with, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle, and guys like that. It made more sense to just do it that way, and it ended up resulting in winning. So it was clearly the right move. So that's not the issue. It's just more or less so I think Fournier is kind of just all right, I want to get out of here. I don't want to be in New York anymore. Obviously I have no spot on this team. So if that's the case, I don't want to be here anymore. And I understand it. Quite frankly, I understand it. These are athletes. These guys want to play. They're not just going to be happy with sitting on the bench. Of course, they understand from a, basketball standpoint, a business standpoint, all that stuff, that certain moves have to be made, and sometimes that person has to be the one that gets affected the most by it. And unfortunately for Fournier, that was the case. He got benched and he never really saw the court that much ever again. But it had to happen. It was the right move the Knicks needed to make. It's time for the Knicks to move on from Fournier. I'm honestly curious as to how they haven't been able to trade him yet. I feel like other teams can see him as a valuable asset, especially if they need some shooting. So, I am kind of curious why he hasn't been traded yet. I do expect him to get traded at some point in the offseason. It would be extremely awkward, especially now after these comments, that if he was still on the Knicks on opening night next season, that would be extremely awkward. I think, they have to move on. They got to separate. They got to split ways. It just, it was a botched signing from the previous offseason. We thought we were getting a good sharpshooter out of him. It didn't work. It didn't work. It's unfortunate that it didn't work, but it's time to move on. But like I said, just kind of wrap up my point. These comments, obviously, he said some pretty, hard things, I guess, if you want to call it that. He didn't curse him out or anything like that, but he made it clear that he's unhappy. He made that clear. He even said he doesn't really have a relationship with Thibodeau because he didn't play him. So why would you? If I don't really blame Fournier in this case. If I'm Fournier, I wouldn't be happy at my head coach who just benched me. I wouldn't. You know what I mean? I'm sure he understands why it happened, but at the same time, he wants to play. So of course he's gonna hold against him for just a little bit. Not necessarily saying he hates Tom Thibodeau, but he has that little grudge because he benched him. It's normal. It's natural. That's just how it is. You know what I mean? So I kind of want to hear Ryan's input on these comments though, because I know I'm kind of just rambling a little bit. So I'll pass the mic off to Ryan and let him dive into this Evan Fournier situation.
Yeah, so from an athlete perspective, you get it. You want to play, right? I completely understand those frustrations. But as you guys had mentioned, it's a business, right? This is the way teams operate. If they are better without you, they're not gonna play you. It would have been worse as an organization if they would have been well, we paid him all this money, so we kind of have to play him. The fit with RJ and Fournier is never that's one of the worst fits I could possibly think of, especially considering RJ's defensive struggles last year. You were able to mask those a little bit more with Quentin Grimes out there. You also think with Brunson there, Brunson's an undersized guard. I think he's good at taking charges. I think he tries to get the most out of his frame. But when you're a 6 foot tall point guard, there's only so much you can do defensively. And he's not a good defender, right? So having him, RJ, and Fournier out there, and Fournier is not just a bad defender. Randall's a bad defender, a below average defender, but he's not a traffic cone, if you get what I'm saying. Evan Fournier is a traffic cone. Like, this is traffic cone levels bad for defense. And he's never been a defensive guy, really. He's a great shooter, but even then, it really didn't feel like the offense was where it needed to be. If he was giving you 18 points per game on ridiculous efficiency and volume from three, like I think he averaged maybe like 17 or 16 his first year with the Knicks, then you're like, you know what? The defensive struggles are there, but surrounded with better defensive talent, maybe it gets better. It feels like it's a bad fit. Like, I don't know if Fournier is actually a bad player, but it feels like a bad fit. And that's shocked that he wasn't traded for him. I think there's a value in Evan Fournier. Like, even in a big deal where like you're just using him as salary filler, if you're like a rebuilding team and you have Evan Fournier playing, 25 minutes a game on like a really bad team that just needs guys to eat up minutes and they just want some picks or whatever it may be, if he shoots well, another team's going to trade for him and then give you more assets, right? And if you're a good team, if you really need the shooting, he can help you, right? He can give you that. Now, the issue is that he's a very expensive option and a very expensive fit for your shooting. So as a contender, you'd rather not have to do that right now. But I do think there's inherent value in taking him on as a flyer. Obviously, we're sitting here and saying that also from the perspective of we kind of want the Knicks to be able to get rid of him so they can open up some salary or open up some avenues to make a bigger trade. Or, if they do trade Fournier and it's not for a salary dump, it means they're getting a player back that's making at least $18 million. And that's probably an impactful player, right? It's probably not some scrub off the street, or at least you hope it's not. So end of the day, like for Evan Fournier and for the New York Knicks, a trade is the best situation. A departure is the best situation for both sides. And, I guess kind of, my real big point here is that, this is just an example of there is a difference in priorities for an organization and a player, and neither are necessarily wrong. An organization, they want to make a profit. They want to win games today and long term. And from a player's perspective, you want to get your minutes. You want to go out there and compete, right? Like, that's just what your intentions are. That's just where you are and this applies to any career, right? You want to go out there and have an opportunity to perform in your field and then make money doing it, right? No one wants to enter a field and feel like they're, not being put into situations where they can thrive or they can help out the company or the organization. And as an organization, no one wants to go out there and, put out worse performers over, better ones simply because they have a higher standing within the organization or because they've been around the field for a while, right? So it's just a difference of priorities here, and that's really where we're at for these two. But Justin, I guess I kind of wanted to ask for your final thoughts regarding Fournier, and then I'll pass it off to Dylan to kind of wrap this thing up.
Yeah. So my final thoughts, I think Evan Fournier has handled this unfortunate situation for him pretty well up to this point. I mean, it's just pent up frustration. You can't really get too mad at the guy for getting frustrated. I mean, he was a pro the entire season. He could have done this last season. He could have done this in the middle of the season last year. Like, oh, Tibbs ain't playing me. I'm angry now. I want to play. Get me out of here. He could have done that in the middle of the season, caused a big distraction. We had a good thing going on, so that would have been not ideal. So, I think he's handled it like a pro. I think it's time to move on, though. Like we've all reiterated thousands of times, I think it's time to move on. It's just, it didn't work out. It happens. I don't think he's a bad player. He can go help another team. He's definitely still a good player. So, it's unfortunate what happened to him, but it's a sad reality of the business. If the team feels like they're better without you, they're going to play without you. And that's exactly what happened. I don't really think you can get too mad at Tibbs for this because, Tibbs told him, hey, man, I'm going to try something different. And then when they tried something different and it worked, he just said, all right, dude, it worked. Sorry, man, you're going to get left behind. That's just how it goes. I've been in this business for 30, 40 years. I've seen this happen before. That's basically what Tibbs is saying. So, that's kind of my final thoughts on it. I want to hear Dylan's final thoughts now. So I'm going to pass it over to him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. It's unfortunate for Fournier that he didn't really get a long-term kind of spot on this Knicks team. He signed a 4-year deal with us back in 2021, so you thought that he was going to be a pretty main component of this team going forward. Unfortunately, it didn't end up working out that way. They figured that Quentin Grimes was the better option. Shrinking the rotation down to 9 guys was the better move, and you know what? It worked. Got to the second round as a result. Was the 5th seed, won 47 games. I mean, that's just how it works. At the end of the day, these guys are running a business and they're trying to make their team successful. And sometimes that may include having to, remove players that you thought at one point were going to be impactful out of the rotation. Sometimes it just happens that way, and with the comments overall, I agree with you, Justin. It's just pent up frustration. It's not, I don't think it's anything we need to look at too deeply. Yes, of course, he said he doesn't really have that relationship with Tibbs, but at the same time, you got to understand, like, the guy didn't play him. The guy took him out of the rotation. So, of course, he's going to feel some type of way about that. That's normal. That's pretty standard. And, I think I agree with also what you said about how he didn't talk about this during the season. I think he handled it during the season pretty well. Yes, he says, at times, the famous one night stand quote, and the whole I do want to play, but they're playing the other guys over me, so it is what it is. He at least understood that, and he understood the Knicks had a good thing going on, so he didn't really want to necessarily interrupt that, if that makes sense, by kind of creating a distraction by fueling up that trade buzz or fueling up that animosity he kind of probably felt towards the coaching staff at the time. He just kept that to himself. He, said what he had to say, but he didn't dive into it too much during the season. He let the team keep flowing without creating distractions. It's the offseason now. I think it's time, he's able to express himself a little bit more about what he thinks about that situation. And, if it's in the Knicks' best interest to just, move on from him, find a trade for him, however you can, get some picks or something, find something that you can get out of whatever value Fournier currently has right now. I know his value is not very high because he barely played last season, but, he's not exactly like a non-factor. Like, teams are going to find him to be useful. There are going to be teams that will find him useful. It's just not the New York Knicks. They're not going to find him useful. They, didn't think it was going to work out, so they took him out of the rotation, and we know the rest of the story. So that being said, I mean, I don't, there's not much more I got to say about it other than, I feel for Fournier. Yes, these comments were pretty, stark, but, sometimes you got to be brutally honest about how you feel about your role sometimes. That's just sometimes how these players got to do. The players have the right to express themselves in any way they want to. So, Fournier feels like it's time to move on. He's not, frustrated with being in New York. Then that's the case. Then so far, then we'll just move on with that. Nothing more else should really come out of this. I don't think there should be any beef stories that will initiate between Fournier and Tibbs. I think it's just, he's not happy he didn't play, but that's normal. It's completely normal. That's pretty much all I got to say. I don't want to repeat myself too much, obviously. So I'm going to pass it off to Ryan to let his final thoughts out and close this out. So go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, so my final thoughts on this are kind of simple. Look, I'm never going to sit here and get upset at a player for wanting what's best for them. I feel like there's always that, from a fan perspective, we are Knicks fans. We're not Evan Fournier fans. We're not RJ Barrett fans. Well, we like RJ. You get my point, though, right? We're not fans of just one player, right? We are fans of the New York Knicks. So naturally, our interests lie with the New York Knicks interest. And if you're a viewer and a fan of the Knicks, your interests are going to lie with the New York Knicks interest. So you want Evan Fournier gone. I want Evan Fournier gone. We want Evan Fournier gone. We were glad that he wasn't in the rotation. We were glad they mixed things up, right? Because that benefits the Knicks, and that is what we are rooting for, things that help the Knicks. But from Evan Fournier's perspective, he's not a fan. He is an athlete. He is an employee of the New York Knicks. He wants, yes, the Knicks to win, but he also wants to make sure that, his needs are met. So, his perspective and his priorities, they're going to include winning, of course, but being involved is part of it, making sure he's involved, making sure he's getting paid also. I mean, he's obviously getting paid, and that's not an issue for him, but, he wants to make sure he can get another NBA contract. If he just gets bought out, is he not going to just sign for the minimum? He wants to make sure that he can secure his financial situation for years to come in the NBA. And part of that is getting minutes and getting tape out there that other teams can look at and decide whether you're a fit or not. So, end of the day, it's just, from a fan perspective, we're not going to view it the same way Evan Fournier is. I think it's just important for us to remember that, right? So with that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys stuck around for the entire podcast, we really appreciate you guys. Let us know what you guys think about the Evan Fournier situation. Do you feel like you can relate from an athlete? Maybe you played sports before and you kind of relate to that situation of, hey, I'm not getting my touches, I'm not getting my minutes, this isn't fun. Can you, are you more of from the fan perspective of, just get this guy out of here, got to pull the plug, it's over. I want to understand what you guys are feeling. You guys can tweet at us. You guys can check out our Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page. The audio version of this podcast is on Apple Podcast and or Spotify. And of course, you guys can check out our personal Twitter accounts. Those are above our heads. We all write for Empire Sports Media, which is obviously the big site for all the Fireside stuff going on here. So you guys can check out that website for articles, We have stuff coming out there all the time, whether it's just the Knicks, the Yankees, Giants, a bunch of different New York sports teams. So if you're a fan of a New York sports team, there's a very good chance we've got you guys covered some written content as well. So we appreciate you guys so much, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace out.